senator, live in Richmond, Virginia. They have 3 adult children, all of whom attended Richmond Public Schools. We are excited to have her here, 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 to
feels a little bit more like my presidency days.
Spread out in such a big room, but I will tell you what, we're doing that in the classroom now too, as your students know. Spend a lot of time. I am teaching our tax taught in person straight through the pandemic, and was in classrooms that enabled us to do the distancing thing and stay safe, keep our community safe, which we're very proud to do. Well, this is my topic. This is what I talk about anywhere and everywhere. Every chance I get is what's up in education. So I'm delighted to get to share that with you all today. I thought what I would do, if we can move to the next slide, is do a few minutes of introductions. Rick did such a lovely introduction, I won't have to add a lot. Introducing myself, and then want to hear, if I can speak well enough, a little bit about you. And then we'll do just a little sampler. So I teach education policy both to undergraduates. I'm teaching this semester a Politics of American Education course, mostly to wannabe teachers and people in the policy government world. And I also teach mostly at the graduate level. I teach program called classes in the Master's in Public Policy arena, and they're all somehow concerned with education. So I'm delighted to get to share with you today essentially a little from a course I do on one of our on some of our most interesting topics in education. I'm going to save some time at the end for conversation. There's lots and lots of big challenges in education today, and I won't try to talk about really most of them at all. So in the Q&A, we can talk about whatever you all want to talk about. So with that, let's jump in. So next slide, just a little bit of more about me. Rick told you that I, as a child, had an opportunity to help integrate the Richmond City Schools. Let's just say my pathway to public service, and particularly to academia, is not a totally ordinary one, because I like to say that my public service career started when I was 12 years old. My dad, Linwood Holton, was governor of Virginia, elected that year, a Republican governor, back when that meant a little bit different things than it might mean today, and announced in his inaugural address that he wanted to make, this was 1970, so Virginia was a different place then, announced that he wanted to make Virginia a model of race relations for the nation. And lo and behold, he had an opportunity, we as a family had an opportunity early in his first year as governor to put some actions behind that goal, when the court that was overseeing the desegregation cases about the Richmond City Schools, where we were attending, issued an order that finally made the beginning of desegregation actually happen in Richmond. Now, we were, my siblings and I were all in the public schools, but we were in virtually all white schools, and I had spent my entire life basically living in an almost all white world, and frankly an upper middle class white world where people were mostly very similar to me in all kinds of ways. And I now had an opportunity to go to, if you'll give us the next slide, a school that was then called Mosby Middle School, after a Confederate hero, as happens in the South. I'm the goofy one in the culottes. That's my mother to the right, my younger brother over my shoulder, and here we were on the first day of school being greeted by a family at Mosby Middle School, which was previously an all African-American school, and pretty much stayed that way for the next couple of years, because most of the other folks that had been assigned to go there their families, for one way or another, found other, 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 found.
We do this.
Mattered in the broader scheme of things, and the reward of feeling like you were contributing to making your community better. And I got my first introduction to education policy, which became my career. And I'll just race through because I guess Rick did it already, but I have had a many and varied career. I was a legal aid lawyer. I was a juvenile court judge. I was a foster care reformer when my husband, Tim Kaine, was governor. And then I worked at the community college system and then had the honor and pleasure to serve as Secretary of Education. When I was Secretary of Education, I got to know Mason for the first time in a real way and got to know what a bastion of access to excellence that population with coming from all kinds of backgrounds, but our students are all have in common their eagerness to learn, their resilience, they are striving for success. And I'm proud to say, and I learned this when I was secretary, that Mason has really the best success rate in the Commonwealth from all our public universities for helping students go from access to excellence. So if you look at the variables of who you're serving and how well you're serving them, Mason really is a standout on the chart. And that meant when I was looking for my next opportunity after serving as Secretary of Education, which came about in a funny way, when my husband and I took a little excursion in 2016 with Hillary Clinton when Tim was her running mate in 2016, which led me to become unemployed in November of 16. When I came to Mason, I was thrilled to be, when I came to academia, I was thrilled to be teaching at Mason, thrilled to be working on education policy and connecting policy researchers to real world policymakers in a practical way. I was happily doing that in the fall of 18 starting in the fall of 18, when in the June of 2019, I got a call. Long story short, I was invited in an unexpected moment, and not something I was looking for. I was as surprised as everybody else when I was asked to serve as interim president at Mason for a year, which I loved every minute of. I'll show you one more slide here, if we can go to the next slide. This is me. If you can see, this is me. may have had a little bit to do with the fact that he hung around here a good bit more during my presidency year. Now, I led Mason through the first 4 months of the pandemic in partnership with incoming President Washington. Very happy to hand the baton over to him. And he and his leadership team and the university have really been just done such a phenomenal job of helping us through the pandemic and back to this time when we're able to be a little bit more normal and hopefully even more normal soon. All right, I think that's enough about me. Now a little bit about you. If we can go to the next slide. So I'm not sure, yes, I can see you if I look like that. If you all can help me know who you are a little bit by raising hands, and you can raise your hand more than once. Who here is a parent or a family member of a GMU student? Okay, most of you, good. Are there any students with your families? Yay, prospective students? Come on, younger brothers and sisters. Other students in college elsewhere? How about educators? Any teachers in the crowd? Yay, go teachers. Parents who have children in the K-12 system? Yes. Parents who have had children in the K-12 system, right? All of us. Anybody out here an employer? Yes. And anybody out here a voter? Everybody's a voter, yay. All right, so this is a setup. Education policy, why education policy matters, and that's my next slide. The answer is all of you. Education policy matters to everybody in the higher ed system, and to employers and voters, because education policy is how we prepare the workforce for the next generation. All right, in a little more detail, I'm going to spend a few minutes here on why education policy. Flagging some of Broadway's issues, and then I'm going to zero in on just one little sample issue. One sample issue that I spend time on with my students in my classes. So first, in the wipes.
I don't know why this is suddenly happening now that
Federal, state, and local level are affecting a lot of people. About 10% of those are in private and parochial schools, homeschools. Homeschool's fairly small. These data are all pre-pandemic, so some of that may have shifted. The 55 million students in the 50 plus million students in public education are now, as of a year or two ago, majority minority. Our public schools is how we welcome newcomers into our society and have done for really generations. And that is even more true now than ever. Large percentage of, large number and growing number of English language learners in our public schools. 12% of our public schools, am I getting both? I think I don't need both. There we go. 12% of our K-12 students have special needs. 50% are eligible for free and reduced lunch. Our child poverty rates in our country are just abysmal, but the student public school population, they are overrepresented in. And free and reduced lunch is not all dire poverty. It goes up a little above the poverty level, but it still means we got a lot of students in K-12 who are needy. Okay, so what should I do here to not get, is this echo driving you crazy? Is it okay? We're okay. Okay, I'll just ignore it. It's coming to me. 20 million students in higher ed, expenditures across all education sectors, and that's including pre-K, K-12, higher ed. And expenditures means not just government expenditures, it means your expenditures when you write those checks to Mason, close to $2 trillion annually. So it's a big sector. And it's a big sector proportionately too, not so much in the federal government sector, but as in states and localities. A lot of times my folks are talking about the relative role of state policy of state, federal, and local. A lot of people think of the federal level first because federal education decisions can affect a lot of people and policy are state and local levels, and in them, education and healthcare are the two biggest budget items in every state government, and they compete for who's top, depending on the state, depending on the year. But it's one of the biggest budget line items in state government, and likewise at the local government level. Also, typically, as mentioned this already, Wagner dispersed authority.
So the video is already in the back.
Yeah.
Now it's just tap out.
Is now fairly heavily engaged in education and providing services to both K-12 and higher ed in various ways. Executive, legislative, judicial branch, all involved. So my students, when we learn education policy, we kind of get a little review of all the different branches and all the different levels of government more generally as well. And there have been big changes over the last 50 years and lots of turmoil and lots of reforms ongoing. Public engagement, sometimes less than we in the education world want, sometimes more than we in the education world want. We can talk about that when we get to Q&A if you like. And finally, how well we do in education has major implications for our nation's economic competitiveness, mobility, democracy, and racial justice. And on to the next slide. So this is just a sort of a laundry list, and I won't try to talk about them all, of major issues pending in K-12 education right now. Actually, I call it K-12 because how do we do early childhood quality and access is something that is much an issue these days. Education reform wars, things have calmed down a little bit, but the whole approach to standards-based education, the whole approach to how do we do testing, SOLs, if you're Virginia, or mostly Virginia families, raise your hand if you're a Virginia family. Yes. So you've had experience with our lovely SOL test. When I was Governor McCullough's Secretary of Education, one of our major initiatives in response to hearings from parents and students and educators was to reform that SOL system to cut back on the volume of testing and improve the use of testing to make it a little bit more positive, a little bit less punitive. But those are still major issues. I say follow the money. We spend a lot of time in my classes talking about that because there are major challenges in public education today, underfunding, inequitable distribution of funding, both of which result in low teacher pay and really very serious teacher shortages, particularly in high-need geographic areas and high-need fields like special ed. All of that before the pandemic, and as you can imagine, the pandemic loaded some of these issues. Racial injustice in education is still a major issue that we grapple with, and really, perhaps most importantly, pathways to college and career success. We got a K-12 system set up to help all be successful in their post K-12 circumstances. Moving on to the next slide. This year, teaching K-12 education this semester, so that's what's on my mind, and on my mind all of the time because of my role on the Board of Education. But current challenges in higher ed are huge too. You know, there are affordability issues, student debt issues, completion rates. Like Mason strives and works hard to have good, strong screen, but really, we have way too many students doing some college, no degree. And those are the folks who most are hurt in the economic long term because they spell out the money and not like the benefits in terms of careers. We're working a lot at a policy level on how to have successful pathways to all kinds of career options. I told you all heard come here to make that there were other alternatives. Yes, everybody needs something post-secondary to be successful, but not everybody needs to go to college, and there's a lot of conversation about that in the policy world. Racial justice, again, at the higher level, and again, exacerbated. Looking to the next slide, so one of the biggest challenges you see listing in both K-12 and racial justice issues, and we can talk about these in education long before
brought by the Black Lives Matter movement. These issues have been around for a long time in education, but those have helped raise them to the fore. But I like to use this slide because these things are hard to talk about for all kinds of reasons. It's hard to talk about racial injustice issues, but if we can't talk about them in the academy, where can we talk about it? Universities in particular are a great place to encourage folks to get informed and to have free and open discussions about what are the nature of the challenges, what are the differences. And we do that a lot here at Mason in a lot of fields, but in particular in education. And I always love to use this slide with my students. If you can't read the print, if there's an elephant in the room, introduce him. And we do exactly that. We share a lot of questions.
No, not at all.
Open conversations about what
I don't understand this. I ran these for 3 hours in my office with no problem. Same laptop, same switcher, same everything. As an OBS into YouTube, but I just tried that OBS into a virtual camera into Zoom, and it has the same problem.
So I'm going to talk about some of the.
It's just when I want to use it, I give up. We can't do streaming anymore. I need to leave relatively soon. I realize we never said when exactly I was leaving today.
Oh, so
So I'll just give you a little bit of background. The guy you're going to hear from is a researcher at Yale. He's a psychiatrist actually at the School of Medicine. Doing some really good
Pull the video up. There, just
one of the things we do, this is what we do in our classes a lot here, is try to use good materials to help so with that, if we can roll that video.
wait, don't play it yet.
Set the link up, it should be on your board. We already pulled it up.
ready to go.
There it is.
Not yet.
And we take.
Screen, that's an iPhone. Now, pixel on the screen and thousands of the sessions that go to. There's a research assistant. You can see she's looking at the exact same thing. That yellow dot is for that teacher's photo at that specific moment.
This is positive.
Now,
Okay, got it.
Looking at a group of preschool students. As you see, one white girl, one white boy, one black girl, one black boy. And he was told, this various teachers who were watching this video, just told them to watch for who is having problems, watch for who's having trouble with behavior. And we'll talk later also about what we can do about it. Typical troublemakers are looking through. And he's watching where their eyes go with the eye tracker. See who they're looking at. And the secret is there are no troublemakers. These are just poor child.
what we did was we told the teachers, look for challenging behaviors. But what we didn't tell them is the truth. And the truth is this, there's no behavior problems in any of these videos. Because they're all child actors that I hired to sit at the table and play with Play-Doh. One of them was a black boy, one was a white girl, one was a white boy, white girl. And what I'm really interested in is not how fast can we find behavior problems, because they're already been found. What I'm interested in is when I need you to believe something from this behavior, who do you look at? Who do you look at first? Who do you look at longest? Who do you keep going back to? In other words, if you were a mall cop, who would you be following at the gap right now? That's basically what we were doing. And what we found At the end of the study, we showed them the pictures of the 4 children, and we said, which child do you think you had to watch the most? And then the screen went blank, and we asked them, put in the letter of the child you feel you had to watch the most. Now, we didn't need to ask them who they watched the most. I come down to the thousands of a second who you watched. What we're curious about is this: when I lead you to believe someone's going to misbehave, where do your biases take your eyes? And then at this point, are you aware of where your biases took your eyes? And then later, after that, are you willing to admit it? And what we basically found was that teachers spend more time looking at the black child when we lead them to believe something misbehaving. That's true for white teachers and it's true for black teachers too. But they think they have boy bias. They think they spend more time looking at boys, especially black boys. But the reality is they spend more time looking at black children, especially black boys. So there's biases there. But for teachers, they might be perceiving it as a somewhat different bias, a somewhat more socially acceptable boys will be boys kind of bias. You can see what it looks like here. In terms of each one of those dots is where teachers looking. It's a new study at the Yale Child Study Center. I had to read it a few times just to believe what it was telling me. The researchers recruited about 135 preschool teachers. They had them watch video footage of 4 kids playing: a black boy, a black girl, a white boy, and a white girl. And they told the teachers, their subjects, watch the video, there may be some challenging behaviors. As soon as you see something that could become challenging, hit the enter key.
That's it.
So, we can stop it there, get the point. And then, so this is revealing problems, documenting with research, the nature of the challenges, but then there's also research on what works to help overcome those biases. And sometimes doing things just like this, just showing this video, the teachers and help folks adjust their bias. Studies that have used techniques like that with police as well as so if we can now go on to the next slide. So just a little bit of history on racial injustice in education. You all probably all know this because it starts with the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, and then the second all deliberates being part of that decision a few years later. So 100 years before that, we had the rule of law was separate and theoretically equal, and the history of the litigation that led to the changes in that fascinating chapter that I don't do in my education policy classes because we don't have time, but it's a really fascinating story, including the very prominent role played by Virginia lawyers. But really, the history of public education since 1954 has been major ways influenced by these decisions.
Still no one's watching.
You know what? We're going to take
So
all children have a great education, world-class education.
I think Mason's Got Talent will probably have the most watchers.
Yes.
And the implications of that across the sectors.
I don't know what's wrong with it. I don't understand.
Widespread and ongoing. Schools went through, have been periods of desegregation that part I got to play in 1970 actually did not result in effectively. We used to say we integrated schools, and I don't call it that anymore. Most people schools now. Name has changed. It's no longer named after a Confederate hero. Martin Luther King School is still all African American.
They used that one.
All very low income. Maybe there was a tiny blip there for a few years. There are more integrated schools now in the county, ironically, the places that folks fled my city for during that time of desegregation. So we made progress. We moved forward.
Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go get my little baby desktop from my office. I'm gonna use that instead. Because I know that works, because PCs don't have this problem. I've never had this problem when I've done it with a PC. So I'm gonna get that set up. No, she had the one video.
Just curious about that link.
We can go to the next slide.
There.
She was gonna
This
play
is
that.
just
So I got it.
data point, and
So
it's
I'm
probably
gonna
too
get
small for you to see, but I'll just tell you here, this is comparing economic and social
That.
circumstances of African American and white families, 1968 and 2018. This is the 50th anniversary of a commission on institutes in America, the Turner Commission. So looking back after those 50 years, what had changed and what had not.
disaster.
So here I'll.
I'm gonna set that up.
Come over
Because
here.
I'm probably gonna go.
Here's a few to
Before
point
I
out.
explode.
Black poverty rates versus white poverty rates, 35% to 10%, black to white in 1968, 22% to 8.5% in 2018. So the gap is shrunk. It shrunk from 3.5 times more likely to be in poverty if you're African American to only 2.5 times more likely. Obviously, a lot of room still to go. And I'll just point out one more here. Again, some of these numbers we actually had progress on, and some we didn't. But the wealth gap, the black-white wealth gap in 1968 was 20 to 1. That's a 5.2%. African American families had wealth of 5% on average, median wealth of white families. It's gone up to 10% in 2018. I don't know what the pandemic has done to that figure. But when you think about what that means for college going, when you think about what that means for, when you have the reserves that help deal with a family emergency, to deal with a healthcare challenge, to have resources to help support a child who needs a little extra help in school. The poverty rates, the median wealth gap, basically, we can talk about how these figures got to be where they are, but the social circumstances that we find ourselves in and that our children find themselves in do not stay outside the classroom. They come into the classroom. Whether you have laptops or not, you have other equipment that might help support what's going on in school. What's going on in the wider community affects what goes on inside the school level in various ways. So we can go on to the next slide. And this is kind of just a laundry list of some of the ongoing impact of race in schools. We talked about unequal resources based on poverty, unequal discipline. Just what you saw in the implicit bias video with Dr. Billy and folks have done clinical studies. I've worked on some myself. The tendency of Black children and frankly children with disabilities, and especially Black boys with disabilities, to be disciplined at a much higher rate, even for comparable behavior, to be referred to the criminal justice system, et cetera, et cetera. Unequal access to gifted education, and there are a lot of factors that come into that. Underrepresentation of people of color in the teaching profession, and this is one where, there's some strange, sometimes an unintended consequences of good policies. When we integrated, when we opened up the workforce more, we actually
There is someone watching now.
Contributed to the decline of the Black workforce in the teaching world. In 1970, before all of these changes, before the Equal Rights and Employment Act of the 1960s, teaching in public schools was one of the best jobs available and open to people in the African American community. And so you had a high percentage of African American teachers teaching students in African American schools, and you had really great quality. And it's a good thing that folks also got a gender thing going at that time. Also, teaching was one of the best careers available to women. Now we have women have career opportunities in all kinds of fields, and it means we have major teacher shortages across the board, but particularly in poverty communities, urban and rural, and that's largely, not always, but largely co-organized with African American communities, and underrepresentation of people of color in the profession. Evidence shows that a student who has, an African American student who has one Black teacher during their career has a much higher chance of going to college and being successful in college. That one role model makes such a difference. And we're now starting to fill our schools with those role models. We actually have seen an uptick keep them very long. We have problems attracting and retaining. One of the reasons we don't keep them very long, the evidence seems to suggest is we send them to some of the toughest assignments. And then, so we send them to schools where they are serving as role models for needy children, but if we don't give them the support they need, it's very high stress jobs, and they leave. And then finally, we've been having pay any attention to the news, right? Probably heard some controversy about cultural competency and curriculum. So what are we teaching in our classes? Part of my role on board education, receiving reports from commission recently to look at our history and civics curriculum in Virginia, and found that both on the on all kinds of ways, even though we can try and we can regularly revise our history and civics curriculum every 7 years, all the different, all our fields go through a 7-year cycle of revision and update. What ends the model that includes those standards that then inform the curriculum. Despite efforts over the last 2 decades, we were really woefully inadequate on showing positive examples of African American contributions in history, but also of being honest about our challenges. We avoid wasting the entire hundreds of pages of documents setting off the stage as well. So we're listening to once. So we've got I'm using my classes to go to the next slide. The United States, we think, has the most segregated schools. So this chart divides it Midwest border, Midwest, Northeast, Southwest, the border, Southwest border. So anybody's got a guess? Who's got the most segregated schools? I think I can hear it. Northeast, somebody says, South, somebody says. Somebody says Midwest. Okay, let's look at the chart. Look at the next page. So, Northeast, whoever said that, you are the winner. Are you from the Northeast? So, yeah. So, interestingly enough, and not surprisingly, in 1968, who had the most segregated schools? The South. That's the South line here. But guess what? Segregation borders and actions of the 60s and 70s actually made a difference. So segregation, this is the percentage of Black students who go to intensely segregated schools. So I think it's defined as 90% and not 90 to 100% all academics. So how many Black students go to all Black schools? And with 80% of Black students in the South in 1968 came all the way down to almost 20%, and it's now back up to 20, now back up to 35%. Meanwhile, the Northeast schools have gotten gradually more segregated over time, and the others dropped some and then that's back up. And some of that's been deliberate policy. There were federal policies that were affirmatively supporting integration efforts in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. There were court decisions, and then some of those court decisions were pulled back some, and it had the effect it had. Not all school isn't necessarily a bad school just because it's not desegregated, but evidence research does show that all students benefit from going to more expensive schools, not just the students from the underrepresented minorities. All students
You have to sign out because your account is signed in front of the device.
You're amazing community on purpose.
Well, apparently we're still going. Fascinating.
You know, again, part of what we
Should have seen that coming.
do is wrestle with problems and get the evidence on problems, and then we can talk about solutions. And there is some research about solutions that work on segregation, dealing with desegregated schools. Some of the best are dealing with housing solutions. So how can we get more mixed income housing across the zoning line? And there are some communities that have tried that. There are some that are successful. There are some communities, actually some interesting ones in the South, like Charlotte, I think it's, Nashville in, Tennessee, one of the major Tennessee cities that have done, made two regional schools and have had good results, both in terms of, desegregating their food and in terms of academic benefits for all. So we wrestle with understanding the nature of the problem so that we can start to think about solutions. We move to the next page, and I won't spend much time on these, but this is just one of the things I do with my students, because this is my world, right? Part of my value in academia is bringing in the world perspective. So I spend a lot of time in the state legislature in Virginia. My students get to learn a good bit about speak to the class about how these changes are made, and they all learn how to research bills and how to follow a bill, how to affect what's happening in legislation. But when we talk about, all the current controversy about critical race theory, the truth is that we are working in Virginia to make our curriculum more inclusive. Critical race theory has got nothing to do with it. It's more about making sure we're telling fuller stories. And there was a bill that passed, created this culturally relevant inclusive task force, and that was what led to that study that I mentioned earlier that showed us some of the challenges in our current history standards. There was also a bill that said we're going to evaluate teachers, but also, and the title of the bill is deceptive, both evaluate teachers and provide professional development to teachers on cultural competency. So how to help teachers understand how to make the material they're teaching connect to suit students' circumstances and backgrounds in all kinds of different ways. And there was legislation that mandated that on the Board of Ed that I sit on. Implemented that by changing the guidelines on teacher evaluation. We did that actually all that's happened in the last year. So as I say, lots going on in education policy, federal, state, and local. If we can flip to the next slide, and I think this is, my final slide. So get ready with your questions and conversation. We do have lots of options for studying education policy at Mason. As I say, we have some undergraduate classes. Mostly those are potential teachers and or potential folks who are looking to work in government sectors, majors in the Shar Policy School, or people who just want to be informed voters. Since going back to my earlier slide, education policy matters across the board. We also have some very strong programs in conjunction with the College of Education. My appointment here at the university is across two colleges. So I'm at the College of Education and Human Development and also at the Shar School of Policy and Government. And those two colleges have combined efforts to produce education policy emphasis area, which is essentially the Shar word for concentration within the Masters of Public Policy program. We also have a graduate certificate in education policy, which is basically a 5-course program that attracts teachers and other education leaders. We have a really strong doctoral program. We have some folks here at Mason who are doing top quality research, economists, political scientists, educators doing really strong quantitative research on school finance reform, on teacher evaluation. How do we make teacher evaluation more effective, more geared towards supporting, and more supportive of how we attract and retain quality teachers. So we have great and great graduate students working with them. And finally, we have a center here at Mason that we've just launched within the last few years on Ed Policy Forward, a Center for Education Policy at Mason, where it's really trying to connect the researchers to the policy-making world. So some of my colleagues next week are the State Board of Education is in the midst of a larger revision of our teacher evaluation guidelines, trying to make those evaluations more constructive. And two of my colleagues are presenting to the Board of Education meeting next week on what the research shows.
both of them are involved in that research. So students have opportunities to get involved in those research opportunities as well. One great thing Mason does is, of the students here, I don't know whether you all are mostly freshmen and sophomore or if they're upper class students, but Mason has some really good options for students to be able to be engaged in research projects, undergraduate research projects. I got to supervise an undergraduate research project a couple of years ago, and a student who just did really phenomenal work. Actually, she was my only continuing teaching assignment during my presidency was to supervise her Oscar project, as we call them. And with that, I think I'm going to pause and see if you have questions or dialogue, or tell me what you want to talk about. As I say, education, I haven't even talked COVID really, other than to say it exacerbates everything, and there's so much in the news. As I say, just like we feel about parent engagement, about political discussion of education policy, educators sometimes appreciate it and sometimes don't. We don't like to be ignored, but then sometimes the noise is so loud that we're like, never mind, go back to paying attention to something else. So with that said, I'd love to have a dialogue, get feedback, questions, and we can talk about this or anything else here at Mason. So can I see you? Anybody? Yes, sir, over here. Oh, and he's going to bring you a mic. Yay.
Hello.
Hi. Oh, and tell me who you are, if you don't mind.
My name's Will. I'm a junior undergraduate here in the Shar School, government school.
Great.
I was just curious to know what your thoughts on the roles of different levels of government should be in education versus what they might be now. So like basically what you think they are now and what you think they should be to improve education in this country.
Yeah, great question. What should the different roles of government be? And well, when I first came here to Mason, I had a counterpart who, Spiros Pratopsaltis, I was coming to the job from my role as State Secretary of Education. He was coming here from a high level position in the Obama administration at the US Department of Education. And we used to do a dog and pony show together because, not surprisingly, he thought there should be more federal role and I thought there should be more state role. So a little bit, the answer is wherever you sit, your one's inclination works that way. And I think that in our federal system, that I am actually right mostly, that even though it's partly where I came from that determines that, but I do think that mostly we are right to have the state level be a bigger determinant of what goes on in education than the federal level. When the feds have tried to throw their weight around, it hasn't been particularly successful. The No Child Left Behind era and the race to the top that followed it were not particularly responsive to the needs and circumstances on the ground, in my opinion, and didn't produce great leaps forward. I don't, and frankly, the fact that the federal government isn't paying much of the shit, when you're only paying 10% of the cost, contributing only 10% of the overall cost of K-12 education, it's a little hard to throw your weight around. But you're asking not just what is, but what should be. And there are definitely some advantages to more federal control and influence. One of them is making sure we have common measurements, because if you can put out good data that shows that students in, well, I'll pick on Louisiana because Louisiana's historically behind in education, but actually making some great strides forward. But if you can say that Louisiana students graduate at high school at a much lower rate than students in Virginia, then that's going to spur the governor of Louisiana and the state folks there to try to improve. But if you don't have a common measure of high school graduation, and that turns out to be more complicated than it sounds, then you can't really do those kinds of comparisons. And so one of the good things that came out of the No Child Left Behind era was some more common measurements, including for graduation rates, so that we can see, we can all, the states can be not only experimenters, but can be competing with each other and learning from each other. There are, I do think stronger state leadership as opposed to local leadership makes sense. And again, maybe that's because that's where I sat. School divisions tend to be, and it depends completely on the state. Some school divisions, some states have 400 separate entities running their schools, school boards, divisions. Some like Maryland have 13. So, you know, but sometimes they are so small that they're really not a good, they can't take advantage of economies of scale. They don't have research capacity. So I think the state level is probably the one that should be raised up more, and that has been raised up more over the last few decades. You can see comparisons with other countries where there is much more control at the federal government level. Singapore, Finland, or some of the countries that people look to as doing really extraordinary work, getting great results, and they've got very strong central control. But the truth is they're kind of the size of states. You know, if you look at Singapore's population, Finland's population, they're kind of more like Virginia than like the United States. So, but even within those examples, Finland and Singapore, for instance, have a state training academy, statewide training academy for all teachers, very strong standards, very strong control of what's going on in terms of preparing teachers for the workforce. So maybe there's things we can learn and things we can do to improve at all those levels. Great question. Somebody's been learning. I see a hand back here.
Hello, and thank you. My name is Heather, and I run an academic support center at a smaller university in Virginia. And I see who comes in, and I see who at this post-secondary level needs more support. So my husband and I serve on the parent advisory board at the local high school where my daughter attends. And I think we're all aware of the analogy of all of us being in a storm, and each of us is riding in some sort of vessel. And when we go to these this principal advisory meeting, we see that there are the people in this storm who are in cruise ships, and they can't see over the edge. They can't see the people in the rowboats. And so we all disagree on what the elephant in the room is. So for parents on that level, do you have any advice when we're in the trenches and we're trying to get the group to come to some sort of agreement on what the elephant in the room is?
Yeah. A great question. And I love your model. We're all in the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat. Absolutely. And, you know, I didn't talk about as much about the impact of the economic differences within schools, but suffice it to say, nothing telling you anything you don't know, the impact of income on student success is huge in all kinds of ways. So if you wanted to do if you took a study on what are the biggest factors in student success in K-12 factor, the very biggest factor would be family income. So in fact, there are folks, Diane Ravitch and others who are opponents of standardized testing who say you could just wipe out all the standardized testing and know exactly what the results are going to be by using family income as a predictor. It is that strong a predictor of academic success. And you know, there are students who are exceptions, who defy the odds, but it is that big a predictor. And within the school building, the biggest factor in terms of student success is teacher quality. Students who live in communities that can afford to pay more than they're required to by the state, who go above and beyond to pay quality teachers, to attract and retain and support quality teachers, get a much better education. So, you know, in most states, including Virginia, we take a have-not situation when students come into the school building and then we make it worse. So advice to parents, I would say first, number one is listen and learn and try to reach across to see who is in the different boats and to hear folks' different experiences. So it's always, I mean, that's an easy answer because we all need to do more listening. But listen to different people's circumstances, try to find ways to get conversations going across those different communities. And then I would say to parent groups, engage in the, I mean, these, decisions about how teachers are paid, about how money is distributed, decisions about child poverty. And so I'm very carefully not talking politics here because I try very hard well, actually what I do with my students, I tell you, is I tell them my politics because you can't hide it anyway, right? It's pretty obvious from my various family connections, et cetera. But so I tell them all up front and then let them judge what they want. But I think I can go here without crossing any lines. I think the biggest thing that could happen right now to advance the equity in education and therefore success, educational, if you want to bring our educational system up to these nations that are really setting a high bar, the best thing to do is help the students at the bottom. And the best way to do that would be to pass the child tax credit that's part of the reconciliation bill that my husband and his colleagues are working on in the United States Senate, because that child tax credit would cut child poverty in half. And it's sort of astonishing to know now, you mean we could cut child poverty in half and we haven't? That it's actually doable. But that is all. So again, much of education policy is stuff that happens outside the school building. Parents can advocate in every possible way for better supports for all students and all families to be successful, both outside the school building and inside. I hope that got at your question. Who else? Up here?
Good afternoon, Dr. Holton. I'm Cleo. I'm a parent of a sophomore here at GMU. I wanted to ask this question. You talked about curriculum, and then you brought up a very good point. The discussion at the Board of Education level with curriculum, how is that discussion going comparing us, state, local, regionally, and internationally, to bring up our curriculum across the board? Yeah. To impact and tell the story of the entire story, and discussing that with teachers inside and how to be comfortable about having that discussion of that elephant in the room.
Yeah, and you mean specifically curriculum on
Yes.
civics, history, race. Yeah, so how is it going? Well, that's a great question. And I don't know that I know enough about what's going on outside of Virginia to talk. Well, no, I do. I know a little bit anyway. Well, first of all, how's it going in Virginia? I think it's moving in the right direction. It's a lot of work. So, and things take time. So it's a matter, it's a matter of training teachers and helping facilitate their work. It's a matter of aligning the rewards system so that it's not all teach to the test oriented, and we have made some changes to that system. This work we're doing about how we evaluate teachers, one of the things we're trying to do in this next wave of working on teacher evaluation is not just to evaluate teachers, for instance, on cultural competency, but then to pair that with growth opportunities. This is not not meant to be a punitive exercise, but to help tie a teacher's need on all kinds of what factors to professional development opportunities. So, the best HR systems in the private sector tie, the evaluation system is something along the lines of the teacher and a principal sit down and say, well, what are your goals for the year? What do you think your biggest weaknesses are and your biggest needs are? And what do you want to work on this year? And then we devise a plan for you together. So we're moving towards a system that doesn't really facilitate that to one that will do that more. And then some bigger challenges is someday we've got to give teachers time to actually do the professional development and to learn. And, the professional learning communities are a great research supported way of enabling teachers to improve their practice by letting teachers have a chance to observe other teachers at work and have other teachers observe them. But to do that, you have to have a system that doesn't have, when you do the international comparisons, one of the things that stands out about the American teaching system is our teachers are in front of the classroom with students such a high proportion of the day. When I started, so I've been a promoter of, I've been a cheerleader for teachers all my career, and particularly in my role as Secretary of Education. And I knew that we had some of the hardest working folks in the teaching profession. But when I didn't actually teach until I got here to Mason. And when I think about how much time I have to educate myself and to prepare relative to the number of hours that I'm in front of students each week, it's 3 to 1. And teachers are at best, K-12 teachers are at best 1 to 3. So, almost a 10 times difference, really. So there's so many structural things we have to change before we can actually get at teacher practice. But revising the standards, our goals of what teachers are expected to teach, I think we've actually made some real good progress in Virginia. This African American History Task Force made some great recommendations. Some of them have already been added into the standards. Some of them will fit in as part of this 7-year cycle. So comparing to what's going on in other states, one of the interesting things that's happened in other states is that, the sort of Common Core in Virginia, for various reasons, never went with the Common Core. But the Common Core focus in other states tends to be so math and literacy based that there's not always as much discussion at the state level on history, civics standards. And when it is addressed, it's sometimes addressed problematically. And, certainly over the last year or so, there have been some to me, in my mind, very troubling legislation that passed. I had a student share with us in my class this semester a story of a Tennessee law and Tennessee's a leader in K-12 education in many ways, at least for a southern-like state. But they've passed a law this year that said teachers can't, I'm forgetting the exact wording, but basically teachers can't teach anything that makes students feel uncomfortable based on race. I'm like, I thought we were supposed to make our students uncomfortable, right? I mean, that's especially in high school level. And what do they mean? And you saw there was a statute that passed in Texas that you have to present both sides of everything. And that's been in the news recently, that some people are interpreting that you have to present both sides of the Holocaust. Well, there are no both sides of the Holocaust. So it's a complicated subject, and it's a good thing, as I said, to have people be engaged. But when I talk to parents, down in the real world, what do parents most really want? They want their children to be safe. And they want their children to be supported, and they want them to get a world-class education. And some of this sort of overly political stuff, it's going to be a setback. It's going to be a setback. I'm not hiding my politics well, am I? Who else? Anybody else? Well, I'll hang around for a few minutes. So if anybody wants to talk one-on-one, I'd be happy to. I'll just conclude by congratulating you on your great wisdom in coming to Mason. I love working at Mason. I loved my chance to be briefly, thankfully, in the leadership role. Because this is such a great university, you made good choices right up front. And I hope your students and all of you have a wonderful experience both this weekend and throughout your career at Mason. Thank you. Thank you all.
Of a break before our next session at 3:30. But again, Professor Holton will be here with us. If you have any questions, feel free to come on up. Again, thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, we can do better than that. You got to give me more energy today. Good afternoon, everyone. Much better. Hello, my name is Rick Gray, and I serve as the Director of New Student and Family Programs, and I have the honor of introducing our faculty spotlight this afternoon. Myself and our guest speaker will be removing our masks during the presentation just to make it easier for you to hear. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole. Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole is an internationally recognized forensic behavioral consultant who regularly works with corporations, government agencies, law enforcement, educational institutions, mental health, and the media. She specializes in the recognition and assessment of concerning, troubling, and dangerous behavior that, if unaddressed, can have a wide range of serious consequences, from loss of business and revenue to loss of lives. Dr. O'Toole is now the director of the Forensic Science program here at Mason. This is one of the most elite forensic science programs in the United States, which provides both graduate and undergraduate degrees in forensic science. Prior to her work at Mason, Dr. O'Toole served as an FBI agent for nearly 28 years. For more than half of that time, she worked in the Bureau's prestigious Behavioral Analysis Unit, the unit featured in the hit TV series Criminal Minds. Dr. O'Toole has worked on multiple high-profile cases, including the Elizabeth Smart abduction, the Unabomber case, the Green River Killer, and the Natalie Holloway investigation. She makes regular appearances on many crime shows like Investigative Discovery and Oxygen, and also works with major media outlets, including CNN, Fox, Good Morning America, and CBS on breaking cases. We are so excited to have her here today to discuss just a few of her experiences and contributions. Everyone, please welcome Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole.
Thank you so much. Am I on? Yes, can you hear me? Oh, yay, wonderful. Thank you for that very generous introduction. How is everyone today? Good? And the family weekend is going well? Good, good, good. So are you ready to get scared a little bit? Okay, I'm not, but let's do it anyway, right? So today I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to talk to you about some of the things that we do in the forensic science program, and to talk to you about some key characteristics of what makes up a violent person. For example, a serial killer, because that's what a lot of people, let's be honest, everybody watches the crime stories, right? Everybody likes a good serial killer. Darned if I know why, but it's just caught on. And as the director of the forensic science program, I have about 400 students. All of them watch the violent crime shows. And they all have their favorites, and they all enjoy understanding what makes somebody tick when they're very violent. So I thought I would start off by using kind of a picture from a movie from years ago. I don't know, the younger people in the audience don't remember it, but how many people remember the movie Carrie? Scared me to death, right? I'll never be the same. And so I thought, well, I'll have a hand coming out of the ground because that'll keep me centered and I know what I want to focus on. But then I also thought it would give me kind of a good idea to tell you just a little bit about the forensic science program and why I think that we are such a unique and incredible program. We have so many initiatives here at George Mason for the students in the program. And as I say, we've got some incredible students. And recently we've gotten a crime scene house, and we have it all set up so that the students can come in and they can actually learn how to practice crime scenes in the different rooms of the house. So we're not just talking about it. They're actually getting in there and being able to do it. And then most recently, hold on to your seats, we have a body farm. Yes, we are the 8th one in the world that has this kind of anthropological facility, and we will be the only one on the East Coast. That's pretty, it's a wow. It's really a wow. It's located out at our Science and Tech campus, and our students will be able to go out there and actually learn how to process an outdoor crime scene. And because a lot of our students want to be CSIs, or they want to be forensic biologists or forensic anthropologists, it's a great opportunity. And we're just thrilled to be able to have this initiative for our students. And again, there's only 8 in the world and right now, and we are the only one on the East Coast. So hold on for more information on that, but it sounds a little bit gory, but the learning opportunities and the research opportunities are just marvelous for something like this. So do I have anybody in here that's thinking about coming into the forensics program? Yay. So there's a lot there, so give it some thought, and we're just very proud of it. So just a little bit of background about our program, and now let me take you into the minds of some people that you only see about on TV that can be identified as just probably some of the worst people of the worst. I will tell you that some of the videos are graphic, and I warn you about them with a slide ahead of time. I will not be showing any gory pictures. 2 things that I can't stand. I'm afraid to death of the dark, and I can't stand the sight of blood. So you're not going to get any gory pictures, but some of the videos can be a little bit disturbing. How many folks in here watch Criminal Minds? Okay. Now, are you going to be shocked if I tell you that Criminal Minds is not the way life really is in behavioral analysis where I came from? No, but you still like it, right? Okay. So let me have them introduce you to the world of serial killer. So I'm hoping that I can make this work.
Research, casework, and training to hunt down monsters, rapists, terrorists, pedophiles, and our specialty, serial killers.
Does anybody here know exactly what a serial killer is?
Someone who's committed more than one murder.
It's very good. By statute, 3 is the magic number. And it's actually more qualitative than quantitative for us.
And today we're going to talk about how some serial killers get made, because if you can understand that, then you can figure out a way to catch them. You see it?
My liege. Okay, this is Rachel Moore, a 17-year-old runaway from Spokane, Washington.
Now, she grew up poor and in a broken home. Her mom left her dad because he liked to drink and beat on them.
And this is Tina Dyson, a 19-year-old college student from Seattle.
Now, she was a trust fund kid. She got straight A's and came from a loving family. Now, these 2 girls couldn't be more different. But the one thing that they had in common is they both crossed paths with the most prolific serial killer the BAU has ever seen.
One thing you should understand is that no 2 killers are the same. They each occupy their own point on the behavioral spectrum. Genetics, brain chemistry, psychology, and environment are all factors.
But we believe that this particular killer grew up in an environment so adverse that he never had a chance.
He endured years of cruel and abject physical abuse,
As well as horribly profound psychological abuse.
When he wasn't being ignored, he was being humiliated.
Now, let me be clear. Most abused kids do not turn into killers. Not even all psychopaths become killers. But this particular unknown subject or unsub suffered extreme abuse. And it has everything to do with why he does what he does.
Now, these are some of his victims. He kidnapped them.
Research.
That's television. But there's some truth to what the actor said in terms of what creates somebody to be so violent that they can go out and murder over and over again. And you've all heard the phrase nature and nurture, right? Nature and nurture is very important to understand when you're attempting to dissect someone that has engaged in some of the most violent behaviors that you can imagine. When I worked in the behavioral analysis unit for over 15 years of my 28 years as an FBI agent, I worked mostly serial murder cases. And I have worked hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of serial murder cases. And I've talked to a lot of serial murder cases. This is my kind of FBI dark humor, so I don't mean to offend anybody. If my mother were alive, she would be horrified. But I'd rather talk to a serial killer than get a pony at Christmas time. They are that interesting to talk to. And you know what I walk away with every time I have the opportunity to talk to one of them? They are as normal as you and me. They look just like you look, just like I look. There's nothing about them that stands out. So if you met them at a restaurant or on the metro, there's nothing about them that you could say, there's something off. I think this is a serial killer. So in talking to them and getting inside their heads, it becomes really important to understand how did they get that way? And in a few minutes, you're going to see how probably the most prolific serial killer did get to be that way. They are tremendously uninsightful individuals. And you know what I also noticed about them during interviews I've done with them, both investigative interviews and clinical interviews? They are very proud of what they do. Can you imagine? They are very proud of what they do. So being able to talk to them has really been insightful, to be able to learn how these people got that way and what makes them tick. And in some cases, why they have been over the years so difficult to identify and to apprehend. So childhood is very critical in the development of violent behavior if we're talking about a child molester or a serial killer. It's not an either or. It's both genetics and it's both nurture. Children that are abused, just like you heard him say in Criminal Minds, children that are abused by their parents do not grow up to be a serial killer. They just don't. Child abuse does not create somebody that is psychopathic. It is the combination of two. And years ago, when I was growing up, they had movies that were titled The Bad Seed. People were horrified by that movie, completely horrified, thinking that somebody could be born bad. Do you want the good news or do you want the bad news? Okay, then I'm going to stand up here and be quiet. We know that there's a genetic link to certain types of mental health issues. It's hardwired, and it does predispose people to be violent. We know that. The research shows that. But it's a combination of the two. And nowadays, because of all the research that has been done on nurture versus nature, you can't really pull them apart. You can't say, well, 50% of why you are acting this violently comes from the way your parents raised you, and 50% come from genetics. There's no way to pull those two apart for any of us, but they do play a prominent role in how people develop the way that they do. Prominent role in how we develop the way that we do. Can you start that for me, please?
I didn't really think I had an urge to kill her. I just wanted her to stop. And
What did you want to do to her?
I didn't want to do with her, just to have her stop. And
But how would you do it? What did you think in your head about how you would do it? That's what we're trying to get at. When did you first think about treating your mom violently to get what you wanted her to do?
probably in 4th grade.
Okay, there we go. Fourth,
the 5th and 6th was probably up that grade.
and what, what was in your mind that you wanted to do to get her to treat you a certain way? What did you want to do to your mom here?
I wanted her to stop being angry at me for not knowing how to.
But she wasn't stopping,
No, she wasn't stopping.
was she?
No.
She kept picking at you, belittling you,
Mhm.
embarrassing you. I mean, that was pretty clear from yesterday.
Happened in school too, so.
So what was your way of retaliating against her in your mind? And what were you thinking to do to your mom?
I was thinking of hurting her. I just wanted her to stop and let me alone. Angry at her for pushing on me to remember, and I just couldn't remember, and just wanted her to stop.
But she didn't.
She didn't know.
She didn't stop. So somewhere in the 4th or 5th grade, that sense of helplessness that you had not being able to get her to stop would very likely have produced thoughts of taking back some power and control over your mom to get the bitch to shut up. I mean, I'm sorry, but Gary, that's what we hear. And that's what one of the things we're looking to get a better understanding of.
During that thing, I usually took it out on other things instead of hurting her. Living things, killing animals.
Okay.
Killing animals. I stabbed a kid one time. Stabbed a kid with a knife.
Tell me about that.
Down by Chinook, where I used to go to school. And boy was playing, I stabbed him in the side. And didn't kill him. And must have been about 6th grade, I think it was 7th grade. And I was breaking out windows, throwing rocks at windows at school.
Not interested in that.
But that's what I took my aggression on. I couldn't take it on my mom. I had to take it on my animals and
How many
the
animals
kids.
did you kill?
I killed a lot of birds, but one cat suffocated in his chest. Shot babies at dogs to hurt them, and threw rocks at my brother about that time. I think I was getting out of that though.
You couldn't take your aggressions out on your mom,
No, I couldn't.
but you could think about it.
I could think about it, and
What'd you think?
I thought about hurting her. She'd shut up and leave me alone, and then
How did you think about hurting your mom?
killing her.
And how would you do that?
With my hands, or I didn't have no guns or anything, so I didn't have hands or.
Then after she was dead, what were you gonna do?
I know what I would do. I just wanted her to stop. One time there, they were gonna put me in a special school. I didn't want that. My dad and my mom were arguing about it all the time. It was for retarded people, and I didn't retarded, I think. So I was mad at them for wanting to put me away from the kids. And wanting to hurt her. And hurt her bad.
What does that mean? Hurt her bad. Help me to understand that.
Just beat her up so she wouldn't leave me alone. And
You do that in your head.
my hands, beat her up with my hands. Use a knife.
What would you do with the knife?
I'd probably stab her with it. She was a big problem I had. I mean, Dad wasn't around that much. He was working all the time, and she was on one of us at control, and she was constantly trying to get me to do better in school, and I just couldn't do better. I wanted to have her stop. Maybe to kill her, to hurt her bad.
Help me explain, help me understand the knife.
Knives are in the drawer. That would be, I use a knife on that, stab that boy.
Are you able to click on to the next slide for me? Okay, thank you very much. For those that may not recognize him, that's Gary Ridgway, who is the Green River Killer. And Gary is one of the two. He may be the most prolific serial killer in US history. This was an investigative interview that I did with him while we were attempting to locate his other victims. He ultimately pled guilty to 51 murders in one county in the state of Washington. And the prosecutors agreed to take the death penalty off the table if he would tell us the other women that he murdered in King County only. It had nothing to do with any of the other cities, any of the other states. It was only one county. He murdered in the 60s, he murdered in the 70s, he murdered in the 80s, he murdered in the 90s, and he murdered in the early 2000s until he was caught with by forensic DNA analysis. My role in talking to Gary was to identify what crimes he was involved in before he started to become a serial killer. Because we know when someone eventually gets to that point where they're good at what they do, there have been other crimes that have enabled them to practice, to become better. And so my job was to try to find those. And also my job was to try to find at what point he had his first violent sexual fantasy. If you were wondering what I was doing, I was trying to identify his very first, not just violent, but violent sexual fantasy. When violence and sex become intertwined in somebody's head, it's very difficult to pull those two ideas apart. So you heard him talk about a little boy that he had stabbed. Did you hear that? So when I went back to the room across the hall, there were a team of us interviewing him. So I certainly wasn't the only one. They told me he's just making that up. Gary really does have psychopathic traits. And one of the traits is that they are remarkable liars. And they lie a lot during interviews. But eventually they went and they found that when Gary was about 16 years old, as he's thinking about murdering and sexually assaulting his own mom with a knife, he had gone out and laid in wait for a little neighbor boy he did not know. And the little boy was under 10 years old. He was wearing a cowboy outfit. And Gary just jumped out of the woods and stabbed him very severely in his stomach. And the only reason that little boy survived is because he was able to get home and his mom and his dad took him immediately to the emergency room. That case had never been solved. And years later, investigators eventually found this boy, now a grown man, well into his 60s. And they asked him, were you stabbed on this date so many years ago? And he said, yeah, I was. What are you asking me that for all these many years ago? And he said, they said, well, you were actually one of the first victims of the Green River Killer. And you could have really bowled him over. But if you're wondering what I was doing with Gary, it was to attempt to find out that kind of psychosexual development that he was going through. He was very interesting to talk to. We talked with him. The interviews were to last 2 weeks. He was supposed to take us to other bodies. The prosecutor estimated 2 weeks to talk to him. Because psychopathic individuals who are not mentally ill, by the way, it's a personality disorder, it took us 6 months to complete our interviews with him. And one of the reasons was that he loved all the attention. He loved being the Green River Killer, loved being the most prolific serial killer. He's still in prison right now at Walla Walla State Prison in the state of Washington. Very, very proud of what he did. And one of the things he had asked me about later, several years back, he was calling me at home, which kind of scared my neighbors. So they wouldn't come over for wine and cheese anymore. Like, oh, well, whatever. He would call at home. And so I eventually went back out to visit him in Walla Walla with the approval of the task force and of course, the prison staff. And he wanted to write a book about his other murders, which could have been anywhere in the country. And I said, I will help you write one thing, but it ain't no book, because you cannot benefit from what you've done to people. It's generational damage with the families that he hurt, and he damaged generationally. I said, I will help you write an article on who your other victims are and where you left them. They were all outside. Victims all left outside over years. We actually have 2 right now we're trying to identify. And I said, I'll give that report to I'll give them that report to the investigators. I haven't heard from him since. So my hope is that he does not go to the grave with probably in excess of several hundred victims, because when you're killing over that many years, you really you've done a lot of damage. But to sit and talk to him was the most profoundly interesting thing. And he doesn't look scary, does he? He just really doesn't. And he's certainly not retarded. He tested average in his intelligence. He had the same job for 30 years. He was married to the same woman for 18 years. He went to church. He did everything normal that all of us in here do. And yet he was the most prolific serial sexual killer in US history. So what do we think when we're watching something? I like it. So what do we think when we hear the terms violent or criminal minds, or even specifically serial killers? These are the terms that we tend to think of. And just recently, I was watching some news and people were talking about different crime cases that are unfolding right now. And people use the term monster. You heard it on Criminal Minds, right? He referred to these people as monsters. And you hear the term evil. And then you hear the term, these people have to be crazy. None of those terms are applicable to these individuals who are so violent. And I don't know why we as a public still feel the need to put such labels on them. So monsters are things that existed in the 14th century when we thought werewolves were responsible for murders. So when we have that mentality, it catapults us back to the 14th century. And as I tell my graduate class and undergraduate class, evil is a religious term. And I don't know how many of you, when you went through college or you went through law school or you finished your studies in something else, you didn't have a textbook that said how to interview an evil person. It does not exist. Or how do you interview a monster? It simply does not exist. And yet as the public, we tend to think that these people are like that. What they do is terrible, but who they are, that's not who they are. And it's a lot harder to accept the fact that violent people, so extreme as a Gary Ridgway, are much more like us than we want them to be. And the nuances, though, are important to really understand. So when we think of scary people, I was just listening to the program Forensic Files driving up here. I was listening to the program called Very Scary People. Has anybody ever watched that? It's really interesting. They profile, did you watch that? I kind of like it. They profile different violent offenders. But one of the comments that was being made on Rodney Alcala, who died naturally not too long back, he actually was a serial killer when he appeared on the dating game. He was a serial killer when he appeared on the dating game. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And the commentator was talking about just how normal that they look. We can't seem to get it out of our psyche that people that are really violent look like characters in movies. And the one that is always interesting to me is we look for scary clowns like John Wayne Gacy, who did dress up as a clown when he was accessing some of his victims. This does not protect us, because I will tell you, what am I doing here? I'm banging this thing. Is it bugging you? Tell me if it bugs you. I'll use my farm voice. I grew up in Illinois. What we're doing is we're really hurting ourselves in trying to understand this behavior. And I've said this, I've been doing this for a lot of years, and I would not say this today as I would have said it 40 years ago, that if there is intervention in this kind of behavior, what age do you think that intervention would be? If you had to throw out an age range, what do you think that would be? 3 to 5, if not younger. 3 to 5. If you want to damage a human being, if you want to make sure you damage them for the rest of their life, do it between the ages of 3 and 5. But don't wait until they're 18 to try to get them some sort of mental health intervention, because it's too late at that point. I can't tell you how many parents I've talked to over the years where I've said, at what point, how many locks do you have on your bedroom door now? And they'll say, what? How did you know I have a lock on my door? Because you're scared of your own child. And there was no intervention done at the time when intervention could have helped, or when you actually had the authority to really do it. Normal people, this is a case that happened in Virginia. He's a little old-fashioned looking, but he looks pretty normal. Do you know who this is? This is John List. John List was an accountant. He was a banker, and he had a family, he had children, and he ended up one day going into his home for reasons that, when I tell you, if you're not familiar with the case, they're not acceptable. So when you hear the media say on a violent crime, well, what's the motive? Why did they do this? There's nothing that I can tell you that I've ever heard over the years that will make you say, I get why you murdered your whole family. Okay, that's the motive I can accept. Never. There's never any motive for these kinds of violent crimes. But John was very normal looking. And this is his pedigree. This is November the 8th, 1971, when he went inside of his family and created what it was a very bizarre crime. He murdered his mother upstairs. He murdered his children and his wife very methodically. And then he turned on some chanting music and turned the thermostat down low. He walked out. He just left. And for 18 years, he was a fugitive, and nobody could figure out where he had gone or what he had done, or had he suicided? What had happened to him? Because 18 years is a long time. And I will tell you this, when you work fugitive cases, it's very interesting that most people don't make good fugitives. You probably don't know that, and I hope you'll never know that. And why don't people make good fugitives? Why do you think people don't make good fugitives and they get caught? Anybody want to take a guess? Well, whatever they like before they're a fugitive, they like after they're a fugitive. So if they like a special food, they'll find that restaurant. If they like a special wine, they'll find that wine store. If they like to golf, guess what their sport's going to be? It's not going to be basketball. It's going to be golf. So they go back and fall into their old patterns. John List did not do that. He was kind of a remarkable fugitive because he was not found for 18 years. And then he was finally arrested. He had started his life all over again, had gotten married again, found a job, didn't do too much either with changing his appearance. He just simply was able to forego the patterns that he had 18 years before when he had murdered his entire family. And what he said that the reason that he gave for doing that is because he was in bankruptcy. He was suffering from severe financial problems, and he didn't want his family to know that or to be embarrassed about it if it appeared in the media. And he felt that they would be reunited in heaven. Now, oftentimes when you interview people, do they tell you the truth? It takes hours and hours and hours. And sometimes you walk out and say, he just lied his head off to me. Or I got a little bit of it, but I don't know if I got all of it. But people feel that that was actually a good part of the reason he did it. Can anybody in here raise your hand and say, I got that motive, that makes sense to me? No. No. The Columbine High School shooters, I worked on this case when Columbine occurred, and I reviewed the basement tapes. In my opinion on the basement tapes, if you look at these two normal looking young men, the basement tapes were some of the most chilling things I've ever seen in my entire life. And the courts had asked for a decision on whether or not these tapes should ever be released to the public. Most everything on Columbine has been released. And I said, no, these tapes should not be released to the public because Eric Harris was the leader in that group. But they both murdered, they both shot and killed people, and they tried to do more lethal damage. But when I watched the basement tapes and I watched Eric Harris as he looked into the camera, he was not on drugs, he was not on alcohol, he's a good looking young man, he had an incredible sense of humor, he was funny, but he looked into that camera and he said, come with me, you can live after this happens. Come with me and you will be a hero. You will live forever. It's like a preacher. And it just sent chills down my back. And I thought, he knew when he made those tapes that he was going to be an icon amongst people that are planning mass murders, even to this very day. And yet when you look at him and you look at how he was raised, look at their appearance. They didn't stand out. And by the way, they weren't bullied. We're always looking for the reason that makes us feel comfortable. They were not bullied. They were not bullied. But the damage that they were prepared to do and the damage that they did do to normal kids raised in an upper middle class society who look like this. That's why predicting violence is very difficult. You can't just look at somebody and just tell. The general public, all of us in here, we use the wrong indicators all the time to identify whether or not a person is dangerous. Here are some of the ones that I've kind of kept track of over the years that we use. My mother used to say when I was growing up, and she died before I ever went into the bureau. She worked for J. Edgar Hoover. So it was, my father was an FBI agent. It's in the genes, right? But she used to say, anybody that doesn't like animals, particularly dogs, something's wrong with them. Something's wrong with them. And I grew up with that, thinking, yeah, something's wrong with people. I cannot tell you how many times I went into people's homes as an FBI agent. First thing, what do you think the first question is I would ask them? Do you have pets? And if they didn't, I'd be like, okay. because that's how I was raised, to love animals and to think that way. There's no relationship between if you don't like animals and you're violent. And yet how we're raised and the kind of the messages we get in our head often influence us, and sometimes for the rest of our lives. Some of the other things that we look at and we get peace of mind is that if somebody has our own religious affiliation, if somebody comes and goes to a prestigious school or has a prestigious job, if the person is iconic. And how many cases have we seen recently, especially out in the movie industry, where people who have been very iconic have actually been behind the scenes predators who've been convicted and are now facing time or actually in jail for their predatory behavior. So when people are iconic in this world, we pay them deference. We pay them deference. I'll show you a case here in just a moment. So I've seen us all make decisions based on these kinds of parameters. And sometimes I'll get a call and people will ask about questions that are, when I first retired from the FBI, I don't know why I got these kind of calls, but they asked me a lot of dating. What should we put on our dating site? Well, hell, I don't know. Don't do it. I don't know. But kind of exploring the risks that people are prepared to take. People put their kids in a car driven by somebody you've never driven with before. People will allow their kids to go to a home because it's a nice home in a nice neighborhood. Once you close the front door to somebody's home, what do you know about them? Zip, you know nothing about them. You know nothing. They could have drugs. They could have weapons that are not locked up and in safekeeping. They could have other people coming to the house that could be dangerous to your children. The risk that we all take relying on these is kind of scary. We're lucky a lot of the time. Again, going back to Gary, here's just a man with his dogs. He loved animals. Well, he did tell me he had been cruel to cats, which right now in my world is a big no-no, considering when I go home, I have 5 of them waiting for me. But look how he looks. Does anybody, this was when he was dating. This was when he was in a dating club. Seriously, he was dating. He was going to, it was before the internet, so he was going to places that had a dating club. And this was how he looked. This is a while back, but does anybody see anything scary about him? There's nothing really scary about him. And so when you look at the women that got into the car with him, these are streetwise women. These were good women that were loved by families and their friends. And they had children and they had moms and dads who loved them. They lived a high-risk lifestyle. Yes, they were engaged in prostitution. Yes, but they were good people. They are good people and smart, very streetwise. They knew that they had a serial killer, and they would go up to the cars and they would say to the men that would park there, "Now you're not that serial killer, are you?" And Gary Ridgway would say, "No, I'm a dad." And the women were moms. And they would say to themselves, "Oh yeah, can't be." And then you know what else Gary did? He'd say, "Well, look at my son's pictures and I've got his toys in the front seat. I can't be that serial killer. Would you do that?" And then when he told me that, you know what I thought? I took a big guess. And I said, "So Gary, you used your son's toys and his photograph to entice these very intelligent women to get into the car," and they did. And I said, "So what happened when you had your son in the back seat of the car with you?" He didn't tell me that. I sort of guessed. Guessing is a course at the FBI. And he said, "Oh yeah, when I had my son with me," he said, "I put him in the back seat." His son was verbal. His son was at least 3 years old. He said, "Yeah, he'd be in the back seat sleeping." I said, "Yeah, but what if your son would have woken up and saw you strangling one of these women?" "Oh, I'd have just killed him." The coldness of some of these people cannot be underscored enough. That lack of empathy that you saw in Gary and that you'll see in a few more videos, That's kind of the behavior that you begin to see when they're really small. You begin to see that lack of empathy, that lack of bonding with other people, even with one's own children. So now the test question is, has anybody here been duped by someone? And it could be just in a social situation, somebody that looked normal. We probably all have. We probably all have. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to tell you a short story. Once I retired from the FBI, I had some people come into my house, vetted by another agent friend of mine. She was more paranoid than I was about having people come into my home. And she said, no, the guy's good. I said, okay. Pre-Angie's List, okay. And so I had him come in, and I'm going to tell you this, and you're going to think, you need to sit down, Mary Ellen, somebody else is going to take over talking about this. This was a pagan motorcycle gang, and he dropped his colors. Is that the right way to say it? Dropped his colors? Anyway, he was out of the pagan group, but he's a really good handyman. So I said, and he'd been working for other agents, and so I said, okay. And he was really nice, and so he did fabulous work, but he started to bring with him his cousin. Very quiet young man, did not vet the cousin. So they finished the job and they left, and probably not a month later, we pick up the newspaper and there's this big article about how this young guy had hired a hitman to kill his girlfriend, and the judge that was deciding a case against him because he had threatened to kill the girlfriend. And when he was arrested, he didn't like that, so he got a hitman to kill the detective, and that hitman was going to kill the judge. Who do you think it was? The quiet cousin. The quiet cousin who was in my house. I had a hitman in my house. That's all I can tell you. I had a hitman in, and I will never forget that, because I thought, I really let my guard down. So you may think that I'm standing up here saying it doesn't happen to me. Well, it did. Now, look, take a look at this case. This case happened actually here in the DC area. This looks like a nice young man, right? These are his credentials. These are his righteous credentials. Great interpersonal skills, charming, glib. He was known as being no criminal record, which is always good when you're hiring somebody. You want to look for that. Had just had a great pedigree. And so he was hired. He was hired. He had all the credentials that they wanted. Had the school seen this FBI poster with his photo on it, they probably would not have hired him. Go back and look at this picture. What do you think he's looking at there? What do you think? Am I blocking you? Can you see? Move up here if you can't see. He's looking into a camera he installed in a school. So when it was learned that that's what happened, he was removed from his position. The problem was he was not arrested at the time. And so he too became a fugitive. And he was gone for a number of years until he was identified down in South America, brought back, arrested, charged, and convicted. But his pedigree is remarkable. His pedigree is remarkable, and people get hired on those kinds of characteristics, those kinds of standards. So what blinds us to dangerous people? Our own experiences, I'll walk over here, so I'll block you guys for a few minutes. Our misunderstanding about violence and what causes violence, our own belief systems. If we're a really giving kind of a person, your tendency is to be more forgiving of people. If you have a personal philosophy that everybody's dangerous, then you're probably not going to interact with anybody. And I use this in class, and it's so interesting. I have a slide where I have kind of a scary looking guy, and the students have to answer the question, do you get on the elevator with this guy, or do you wait for the next elevator? And you know what I have found, except this class I have right now, they're totally amazing students. All my students, everybody, all the students here at Mason are amazing. But this class, the women students said, I'm not getting on that elevator. And you know what? Most of the time, the women will get on the elevator. And do you know why? Why? I don't want to hit her. I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want to hurt their feelings. And I tell them the only way you can verify whether or not that's a dangerous person, and there's only one way to verify that. Do you know what it is? Get on the elevator and have the crap beat out of you. That's the only way you can verify it. There's no empirical data to say if you dress in a t-shirt and you look kind of creepy, you should come to my house. You should have come to my house during COVID, and I was teaching virtually. You probably would have, I'd scare you to death. But there's no empirical research to say dress defines behavior. Nonetheless, if that's still something you're uncertain about, you have to have plan B. And kind of defaulting to, I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, is something that we may want to take another look at. But throughout the last I've been here 6.5 years, and I do this all the time with my classes. The young women will be, I'm not sure I want to hurt that person's feelings, which is concerning. So we ignore behavior, and you know where I see this a lot? I still am involved in threat assessment for mass shootings. And we have warning signs for mass shooters, whether it's in a school, whether it's in a business, or whether it's in an open venue. And we tell people, here are the warning signs to look for. Law enforcement can't identify everybody that could get an arsenal of guns and go someplace and be violent. We just don't have that ability to be inside everybody's living room. So we teach people, here are the warning signs, but people still don't see them. And I've been collecting this for about the last probably 30 years. These are the reasons that people don't do it. They ignore the behavior, they rationalize the behavior, they explain it away somehow, or they normalize the behavior. We all do it, especially if we're talking about someone we love that's in trouble. This is how we explain away that behavior. It doesn't help really anybody. So what do profilers do that help us to understand the violent person? We look for patterns of behavior. We don't look for a bad hair day on somebody. We don't look for people wearing black trench coats. Or at the time of Columbine, if people listen to heavy metal, I used to get a call all the time. They're listening to heavy metal music and they're wearing trench coats. Duh, so what? That means absolutely nothing. So, but you have to look for pattern of behaviors. And what are patterns of behaviors? Patterns of behaviors are behaviors that occur, that you engage in over your lifetime. It's very difficult for you to break your patterns of behavior. That's why fugitives get caught. Very difficult to break a pattern of behavior. The first thing that I teach students is your patterns of behavior come from your personality. And your personality is the engine that make you who you are sitting here today. Now, do you want the good news or do you want the bad news about personality? I'll do it either way. Get it over with. Rip that bandage off there. Yeah. Okay. Your personality forms and forms and forms, just like your brain, until you're in your mid to late 20s. Why it's so difficult when you see a child committing a violent crime. You know that they're evolving. But your personality changes and evolves. It's a product of your genetics and your life experiences and how you were raised. By the time you get to be in your late 20s, or we could even push it to your early 30s, guess what happens to your personality? It is hardwired. that means you don't change it. You can change your behavior, but you don't change your personality. Now, what do I mean by that? How many times have you heard somebody in your family or a friend that said, that is not the man I married 30 years ago? Yeah, it kind of was. You just kind of ignored the behavior. That's why I'm divorced. But your personality is everything about you. It's how you view the world. If you view the world as half empty today and you're above 30, you're going to view the world as half empty 40 years from now. Your personality gets hardwired. Now, the kind of violent behavior that I'm talking about is a personality disorder called psychopathy. Some of you have heard of it and refer to the term sociopathy, right? They're basically the same thing, except sociopathy was thrown out by the mental health people in 1968. The term we use now is psychopathy. And there are 20 traits to a psychopath, and the FBI has opined that we think about 40% of violent offenders are psychopaths. It's not a mental illness, it is a personality disorder, and it is defined by this, which is very difficult to wrap your mind around. These are people without a conscience. You're going to see one here in a few minutes. They are without a conscience, and they view other people as objects, even if you are their spouse or your child, which is why Gary said, I would have killed him. So if your personality is really flawed, and it's flawed in terms of psychopathy, which is the most devastating personality disorder, that's a dangerous, dangerous personality disorder, because you can go through life doing anything you want and you feel no remorse or guilt for it. That is a deadly combination, especially if you're involved in sex crimes. That's a deadly combination. So when you're trying to understand somebody and trying to figure out how they tick or what they do, I've broken it down to 6 areas of a person's life, and we all have them. We all have 6 areas of our lives. And the ones that are the most important are down below, secret. So if I'm working a case, and in our program, we work cold cases because of the kind of faculty that we have. We've all been practitioners. What I'm looking for is, I don't want to know what you had for breakfast. I'll take that. But I want to know what's going on in your secret life. So 6 areas of a life in the FBI, when we would do assessments on people, we would talk to family. They're good, but they're always pretty protective. We would talk to the people where you get your dry cleaning done, because they have no vested interest in you. We would talk to your neighbors. They're always the people say, oh, he's such a nice guy. I didn't think he was a serial killer. So we talk to the neighbors, we talk to coworkers, but we try to get it down to trying to find out something about someone's secret life. And that's a tough one, but everybody has 6 areas of their life. And before you can size somebody up, you really do have to know something about all 6 areas of their life. If we knew this about this man, if we knew this about him, and I will come back to the relevance of the photograph. We would have known more about this. Are you following what I'm saying here? This is Colonel Williams. He's Canadian. He headed up an Air Force base up in Canada. He was a pilot, highly regarded. Had an incredible list of dignitaries with whom he knew, with whom he was friends. And it happened that there were 2 women that were murdered and somehow associated with the base. One of them was a woman that worked under him in his command. The detectives worked on the case for a long time, and of course they would give him regular updates because he was the base commander. And then at one of the murder scenes forensically, so now you've got my attention, forensic science, they found some tire treads, which were very unique. And only a certain type of vehicle in that area up in Canada at the time had those kind of tire treads. And guess who one of them was? Yeah, Colonel Williams. And they went and they talked with him. And as they began to talk to him, they began digging deeper into his life. And they found that at the same time, they had a rash of residential burglaries in the area. And these burglaries included the theft of young women's underwear. And then after they began to serve the search warrants, they found that this was a picture of Colonel Williams who broke into a home. Nobody was there. He stole the young woman's underwear. And at that home, he tried on the underwear and took pictures of himself and did this many, many times, and then took the underwear home and kind of inventoried it. This is what we would call a secret life. He's breaking into other people's homes. So that was, when they first met him, they only had a picture of who he was. They only had a picture of how important and how iconic this man was. So secret life versus public life becomes really important to clearly understand. Because someone is really successful does not mean that they don't have a secret life that can be violent and very criminal. These are some traits that I have identified as being particularly, the patterns are particularly problematic. And I'll just highlight a few. And I'm going to show you a few videos as we wrap it up today. There are several things up here that are really a problem. And one of them is, as I turn around, the lack of empathy, injustice collecting, and the objectification of human beings. In order to kill someone or to be really violent towards someone over and over again, a pattern of behavior, you have to see them as an object. They're no longer a human being. Now, do people just wake up one morning and look at other people as objects? That's learned behavior. The objectification is learned behavior. We're seeing a lot more of it now that we have the wonderful internet, where you can get anything you want, and you can be radicalized on the internet. Once you are immersed in some things that 40 years ago, 30 years ago, during Columbine, they didn't have the internet. Look what they did. So the rates of objectification of people is going up really significantly. All you have to do is be immersed in pictures or rhetoric or other kinds of information or behavior, and eventually you turn people into objects. You know where that was first researched and researched in detail was after Nazi Germany. The Jews were turned into objects. And you can see that when you look at the language that people use when they're referencing certain people. That's a really scary place for people to be. The lack of empathy for other people is a very scary place for people to be if it is a pattern of behavior. I'm not talking a one-time deal. And then the injustice collecting. What is injustice collecting? That means you go through life, you learned it at an early age. I'm going to get out of your way so you can see it. You go through life collecting injustices that you think people have done to you, whether they're real or not. Lack of empathy means you don't care about other people. You can't walk in their shoes, and you don't want to walk in their shoes because they're not important to you. They're not human to you. A lack of empathy, again, is a personality trait, and once it's hardwired, it's hardwired. And then blaming others for and turning people into objects. I'm kind of walking back and forth, trying to make sure you can see everything. Timothy McVeigh, because of Oklahoma City, blew up Oklahoma City, committed all those murders. He turned people into objects. And Adolf Hitler, if you read his writings, Mein Kampf, some of his speeches, you can see where he turned people consistently into objects. He was one of the most skilled people throughout history to do it. He wasn't highly educated, but he was one of the most skilled people to objectify other people. Let me tell you just a little bit about this person before I want you to see an example of objectification. I want you to see an example of an injustice collector. This is the young shooter down in Isla Vista, Southern California. He was, at one point, he has a manifesto. He started that at a very early age. This is Elliot Rogers. He started to collect the ideation of wanting to shoot women because he blamed women. He's actually an incel. You know what incels are? Incels are a group of men who believe that women are the cause of their not being able to have sexual relations with women. And we've seen a number of mass murders that have been the result of an incel. Elliot Rogers is one of the first most popular or high-profile incels. He's now a hero in the incel movement. At one point, the police went to his home because they were told by his parents and by medical health professionals that he was contemplating suicide and homicide. They knocked on the door. Elliot said, "Oh, my parents worry too much about me. I just broke up with my girlfriend. It is no big deal." So the officers had no choice. They can't just bust the door down. And it was within less than a week that he went on the shooting rampage. This is one of the videos that he created before he went on that rampage. Can you start that for me, please?
Hi, Elliot Rodgers here. Well, this is my last video. It all has to come to this. Tomorrow is the day of retribution. The day in which I will have my revenge against humanity, against all of you. For the last 8 years of my life, ever since I've hit puberty, I've been forced to endure an existence of loneliness, rejection, and unfulfilled desires, all because girls have never been attracted to me. Girls gave their affection and sex and love to other men, but never to me. I'm 22 years old and I'm still a virgin. I've never even kissed a girl. I've been through college for 2.5 years, more than that actually. And I'm still a virgin. It has been very torturous. College is the time when everyone experiences those things such as sex and fun and pleasure. But in those years, I've had to rot in loneliness. It's not fair. You girls have never been attracted to me. I don't know why you girls aren't attracted to me, but I will punish you all for it. It's an injustice, a crime, because I don't know what you don't see in me. I'm the perfect guy. And yet you throw yourselves at all these obnoxious men instead of me, the supreme gentleman. I will punish all of you for it. On the day of retribution, I am going to enter the hottest sorority house of UCSB. I will slaughter every single spoiled, stuck-up, blonde slut I see inside there. All those girls that I've desired so much, they would have all rejected me and looked down upon me as an inferior man if I ever made a sexual advance towards them. While they throw themselves at these obnoxious brutes. I'll take great pleasure in slaughtering all of you. You will finally see that I am, in truth, the superior one, the true alpha male. Yes. After I've annihilated every single girl in the sorority house, I'll take to the streets of Isla Vista and slay every single person I see there. All those popular kids who live such lives of hedonistic pleasure while I've had to rot in loneliness for all these years. They've all looked down upon me every time I tried to go out and join them. They've all treated me like a mouse. Well, now I will be a god compared to you. You will all be animals. You are animals, and I will slaughter you like animals. I'll be a god. Hi, Elliot Rogers here.
That is I think, profoundly disturbing video. It may seem like it's a joke, but he went on to carry out the murders of a total of 6. He killed himself, a total of five people. The thinking is real. The thinking is hardwired. And this is an example of someone that is a dangerous injustice collector and objectifies people. And then finally, the Iceman will show you what a lack of empathy looks like. Can you start that for me, please?
Mr. Kuklinski, we're going to conduct a plat search here. Put your arms out.
On May 25th, 1988, Richard Kuklinski was convicted of multiple murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. This ended 30 years of cold-blooded killing by a master criminal police called the Iceman.
Richard Kuklinski is one of the most dangerous criminals we have ever come across in this state. He murdered by guns. He murdered by strangulation. He murdered by putting poison on victims' food. He did all of this at the same time while exhibiting a normal, placid family existence. His wife, his children are uninvolved in his criminal activities. Yet, we are faced with convicting evidence of numerous grisly murders.
How many people have you killed?
I have an approximate guess. Approximate, we'll go with more than 100.
How do you feel about killing?
I don't. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't have a feeling one way or the other. I think if I had a choice, I wouldn't.
The following program is based on 17 hours of an interview conducted under maximum security at Trenton State Prison. Law enforcement officials allowed our cameras unprecedented access in an attempt to uncover details of various unsolved crimes. It was also hoped that the interview would help to penetrate the mind of Richard Kuklinski, a mind made for murder.
Richard, when you were on the streets, what kind of weapons did you use?
When I was out on the street to do something, I carried 3 guns and a knife. I had a Derringer in each pocket. And a gun on my ankle, a bigger gun just in case, and a knife. And it all depends how it came about.
Yesterday, you used a shotgun, a stop light or something like that.
I don't know. We were following this fellow. Pulled up a red light, came alongside of him and shot the shotgun, took his head off. He never saw the green light. was a sawed-off shotgun. It was very, as a matter of fact, when it happened, it surprised me. I expected the man to die, but it really surprised me when it took his head off. It was something I didn't expect.
Richard Kuklinski is not a serial killer. He's not a drug-crazed, wild man running around with a machine gun. He's not a person that is driven by perverse sexual desires. He doesn't drink. He doesn't gamble. All of these things, which many persons that are involved in killing and murders often are motivated by. Richard Kuklinski, instead, is nothing more than a predator on human beings. His motivation is greed, and his method of murder is very varied and very extreme.
Richard, I understand that you're an expert at the use of cyanide.
That's a look at someone without empathy. That's a hardcore look at an individual who feels nothing. Could you take the next slide, please? If you wanted to have added reading material, I include this, but at this point, what I'd like to do is, thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I want to make sure I have at least a couple of minutes for questions and answers. I know I left you on a heavy note, but I want you to go out and learn more about this. I can't make it any better. I wish I could soften it up. I thought about putting my cat Elvis's picture up here to make the ending a little bit softer. But as you see, I have Sissy up there on my broomstick. So I just want to thank you for being with me today. I want to thank you for bringing your students to George Mason. I love George Mason. It is a fabulous university. I'm very proud to be part of the faculty here. And on that note, thank you, our moms and dads and aunts and uncles. And please let me answer any questions you have as you walk out. You've been a delight. Thank you. You're also scared. Are you scared? Oh no. Don't ask me to walk you to the car. I don't carry my gun anymore. Yes, sir. The question is, can I go into the 3 to 5 age range? Because in 3 to 5, that's when you're just really everything is clicking. And your sexuality is being formulated. Or if there's going to be for example, an issue with paraphilic behaviors, which are sexual deviations, can range from peeping toms to sexual sadism. Those are learned in the ages of 3 to 5. So coping behaviors, how you cope with life, that is a very, very sensitive period of time for a little boy and a little girl, 3 to 5. And unfortunately, that's a time when little children are frequently very abused or they witness abuse. It doesn't have to be that the child themselves might be abused. It's the witnessing too of abuse as well. So it's a combination of things. When they get older and they become more independent, they have their friends and they have their circle gets a little bit bigger. But when you're 3 to 5, you can do a tremendous damage. It's not fixable. I think that's really scary. I think that's very scary. Yes, sir.
Would there be would that be to kind of throw our mind off of the fact that they are also human, to make them worse, to make them in our mind worse than they really, or just trying to think how to properly phrase it.
using the term monster or they're evil or, they must be crazy. It takes them out of the human kind of box and puts them into another box. And I think that does make it easier for us. And I have at times said, I'm working a case right now where it's hard for me not to look at the behavior as being, the behavior itself is monstrous, but the person that committed it, horrible person, but not the monster. But I think you nailed it. I actually think you nailed it right there. Excellent. You want to come and be in my class? Okay. Love to have you. Yes, ma'am. Well, the University of Tennessee, with Bill Bass, who started it, is not just one of 8. It is the flagship. It is the flagship of body farms. And the beauty about these body farms, our director is Dr. Anthony Falsetti, who's a board certified forensic anthropologist who studied under Bill Bass. All the directors of the body farms, they get together to collaborate and to share ideas because we're all in different parts of the country. So we really want to understand. So there's not that rivalry, and everybody loves and reveres Dr. Bill Bass. He's still alive. Do you know him? Oh, he's legendary. He's legendary. Somebody else had a question. Yes. Pardon? No. They do. Their violence is different. They don't do the predatory stuff. The predatory kind of violence. I thought years ago that they would start, we'd see a lot more predatory violence in women. We still haven't. We still have not. But women have yes, absolutely. Yeah, we do. Thank you for bringing that out. Somebody else, anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Yeah. He's getting that from the reports that Kuklinski has reported that he was murdering for money. He claimed to be part of the mob, new information about where Jimmy Hoffa is buried and so on and so forth, but he was doing it, he claimed, for money. I don't for one second believe that that's the only motivation. And if you leave here tonight, just keep in mind, there's never just one motivation for violent crime. There's multiple motivations. And you know what else? Motivations change during the crime itself. So was Kuklinski, AKA the Iceman, was he getting off on the thrill and the excitement and the predatory part of it? He certainly was. And he happened to be paid for it. But was there more to it? I believe personally that there was. And I'm not even sure that he wasn't, be honest with you, I'm not sure he wasn't also sexually aroused by some of the stuff that he was doing, but we're never going to know that. He died in prison. Yes, ma'am.
I
Yes,
was
sir. Hi.
wondering if you had the thoughts or insight into the recent murder of Gabby Petito and the suspect who's been on the lam for almost 2 months now. You talk about personality, you can't change it. If you were asked for advice by the investigators, what would you say to them about his whereabouts or how he could be still free after 2 months?
So just so you know, I don't have any inside information on the case. I haven't consulted with investigators. I know what all of us know from the news. But I would say this, having worked a number of fugitive cases, which is why I kind of default to that. John List wasn't even as wanted as Brian Laundrie is right now. I mean, everybody is looking and social media has put his face out there. So he is really extremely well known by everybody. And it's not just law enforcement. It's going to be very difficult once he comes out of hiding that he's not going to be seen right away. So it's more than likely he's not roaming the Shenandoah Trail in the daylight where other people could see him. He's hunkered down somewhere. But I have seen in cases like this, and I did do some stuff for Fox and CNN, so I'll say what I said there. which is you have so many people looking for him. Again, not just law enforcement, but everyday people that his life is in danger. That's number one. But number two, when people do get their backs up against the wall, suicide is not out of the question. And also, he has no criminal experience. And so he's handling a situation that he's never had to handle before. Some of the people I'm showing you here, they had a pattern, a lifetime history of criminal behavior. I don't think he has any criminal behavior. So from that perspective, he's kind of winging it. And winging it is never a good thing to do when you have the entire country looking for you. Yeah. And I think it's overrated to say that people have the ability to live like on the grid. Very few men and women can really live on the grid. I mean, I watch TV. I know about people that can live on the grid. They live on the grid for years, but going camping and so on and so forth. Even Eric Rudolph, who eluded the FBI for years, people thought he could live off the grid. He was still breaking into cabins and stores and resupplying his food. So living off the land, 100%, very difficult. Yeah, good question. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Yeah. My understanding is he's doing well. He's an adult. And he's living his life the best way that he can. I don't know, at the time when I was doing it, the investigators, we weren't following up with him specifically, but that was more an internal reason that we didn't. I mean, as you can imagine, very difficult to know that, just like with the Iceman, it's very, very difficult to, hear that your loved one is this legendary serial killer. So I'm just hoping, and I'm hoping that he's doing really well. Tough situation though for him to be in. So the answer is I really don't know the answer to that specifically. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
The question about Gabby Petito just made me think of something that's been concerning to me. And I would be curious from an academic perspective. In addition to all of the other racial disparities in our society, if we think about the slides that you showed and the pictures of the women who were brutalized and disappeared, I apologize, I couldn't see all of them, but I didn't see a whole lot of women of color. And one of the things that's happened with the Gabby Petito situation is we have a blonde white woman who disappeared, and now the FBI is looking for this man who, not to be callous, but murdered one woman. I mean, he's not, as far as we know, he's not a serial killer. He's not. So I'm curious from an academic perspective, at George Mason, you would know most, but it sounds like you know a lot of other programs as well. How are we educating students? How are we educating people who are going to be moving forward in these careers? Not only the importance of every human life matters, but are there any efforts within FBI or those sorts of organizations? I know in Florida where that happened, there was a huge outcry because there was a woman of color who had disappeared right before that, and there was no FBI investigation, et cetera. So could you speak a little bit about maybe efforts to address racial disparities in investigating things like this?
And I think that's such an important question, because having worked a number of serial murder cases, the women that Gary had victimized, there were a number of women of color in his cases. But I can tell you that there was, I believe, in my opinion, that there's a disparity between how victims are treated in cases. I don't think there's any way to get around that. But I do think nowadays investigators are a lot more tuned in to the fact that that's happened. The reason the FBI has such a prominent role in this case is the murder occurred on federal property. So I think that's important to understand. But no, you raise a good point. And I'm hoping that there will be some new initiatives that come out from the Department of Justice about some of these cases, because there are many young women of color, young men of color that have gone missing. And you have to say to yourself, what's been done on that case? So it's very, very concerning. But I do believe that things are changing, because I think that this has been a wake-up call for everybody that's watched it. We don't want to see what happened to her. That's a horrible thing. But we have so many young people and people of all ages that have different backgrounds, that have different sexual identities, people of color. And it's got to be equally distributed investigation across the board. We can't hide from that question anymore. It's a good one. I'm glad you asked that. That really brought it home when you see that. That really brought it home. Anybody else? Yes, sir. You mean the shooters today? Well, I will tell you this, at the time that Columbine occurred, there was no internet. Okay? There was no social media. I mean, it was very, very limited, if at all. But now you have the opportunity to go in and really immerse yourself and share stories with other people that are like-minded and are thinking the same kinds of things. So we know that sharing of ideas and that opportunity to immerse yourself and to do all of these things that we're seeing today that we did not see 20 years ago, we have to admit in large part is due to what people can access on the internet. So if people are copying one another, if people are encouraging one another, Klebold and Harris didn't have that chance to do it. It scares me to think if they did, what that shooting would have been like 20 some years ago. But I love the internet too, just like everybody else, but there's just a lot of things we're seeing from a sociological perspective that has promoted things like pornography and deviance and immersion into radicalization and all those kinds of things that now are possible that weren't 20 years ago. Another good question. Anybody else before we call it an evening? Well, again, let me thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. Oh, yes, sir. I teach a graduate and undergraduate class on critical thinking. And that's the first part of the semester. And then the second part of the semester is criminal investigative analysis. And the students, the first half, they have a mystery that they have to resolve using critical thinking, Amelia Earhart, D.B. Cooper, or Malaysia Airline 360. They have to use critical thinking and explain not what the textbooks say, what happened in those cases. And then the second part of the semester, they pick their own crime. It could be anything. And then they have to explain it through two lenses, victimology and offender risk level, and then the forensic science or forensic evidence that's left at the scene. So critical thinking is one of the leading traits or skills that employers are looking for today, regardless of the job you go into. So I'm hoping that it helps, but my students are wonderful. I love my students. Okay, well, we'll call it a night. My pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
That's interesting. Thank you so much, Dr. O'Toole. We have a gift, a token of our appreciation from New Student and Family Programs. Join me in another round of applause for Dr. O'Toole. Appreciate it. Well, thank you so much for coming out this afternoon, and we hope that you enjoyed the rest of your evening, regardless of what you're going to get into this evening. We're going to ask that everyone exit through the back door, so feel free to head that way. If you have any questions, we have staff at the tables right in front of Dewberry Hall, so feel free to ask them those questions. But thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.